And my birthday, I got a surprise from the family. The moment I pushed open the door at the Cheesecake Factory, the wife stood up and threaded her fingers through Richard's. "I'm his wife," she said, calm as a judge, while my grandchildren clutched balloons that read, "Happy 67th, Margaret." The hostess stalled, the servers froze with a sheet cake, and the smell of garlic and butter turned my stomach. Under the pendant lights, his wedding band flashed like a siren. My son Michael's jaw locked. My daughter Jessica stared at her napkin as if it might save her. She was younger than me by a decade. Neat cream blazer, nails like tiny mirrors, and a voice that didn't tremble. She slid a stack of printed texts across the table, my messages to Richard, while someone at the next booth pretended not to listen. I could hear the ice machine rattling, my heart keeping time with it, my cheeks burning hot against the restaurant's air conditioning. Richard breathed my name, small and useless. I stayed standing because sitting felt like surrender. At 66, I thought I'd outlived ambushes like this. But there I was, the banner drooping over my head, a candle sputtering into a puddle of frosting, and everyone waiting for my tears to confirm the verdict. I'll tell you how my birthday became a courtroom and how I was the last to know, starting with a salsa class 2 summers ago, a kind smile, and a lie wrapped in a widower's story. If you believe birthdays are for love, not humiliation, and that women our age deserve the whole truth, subscribe to follow what really happened next and how I took my life back. I kept my hand on the back of the chair as if it were a railing on a ship, something to steady me while the room tilted. The banner still read, "Happy 67th, Margaret" in glittery cursive, and the candle on the cake had given up, a puddle of wax sinking into vanilla frosting. I heard the clatter of plates and the hum of the ice machine, and beneath it all, the small noises that come with humiliation. Throats cleared, whispers that want to be kind but are not. The way the servers held their hands still, so even the napkins looked afraid to move. "My name is Margaret," I said, because I needed to claim something in that moment before it was all taken from me. "And this is my family." I looked at Michael, whose jaw had settled into the position he used as a boy when he'd been caught lying about a broken window, and Jessica, whose eyes were fixed on her napkin as if it held a secret code. My grandchildren, with their balloons bobbing against the air conditioning, blinked in confusion. They knew birthdays meant songs and slices of cheesecake they were allowed to eat before dinner, not this frozen tableau. The woman, in her cream blazer and tiny mirror nails, didn't blink much. She kept her hand laced through Richard's, and when he tried to gently ease away, she tightened her fingers as if to remind us all who held the claim. "I'm Vanessa," she said, turning a little so the pendant lights made a bright mark on the diamond that sat near her wedding band. Richard's wife. He had never said her name to me. He had said widowhood, and he had said grief, and he had said in that kind voice at the salsa class 2 summers ago that learning the basic step, forward, back, made his knees feel reliable again. He had said a lot of things that had made me feel safe. Now he said my name the way a student says the last answer on a test when the bell has rung and the teacher is already walking down the aisle collecting papers. "Margaret," he breathed, small and useless, a sound smaller than a sigh. "Please," I managed, keeping my own voice quiet so it would not crack against the glassware and spill everywhere. "Let's not do this in front of the children." Vanessa's gaze moved to my granddaughters, who had the same hair as Jessica, a rich brown that held light like honey. She considered this and then shook her head almost imperceptibly. "No one forced you to do what you did," she said, and her tone wasn't angry. It was level, the way a person reads a grocery list. "No one forced you to text my husband." And here she slid the stack of paper closer, a half-inch at a time, as if court had called us to approach the bench. Receipts, exhibits, the weight of print. "I'll be brief," she added. "I know you're celebrating." The server nearest us held a cake knife in midair. The hostess, cheeks pink, murmured that maybe a different table. It's more private in the corner, and I held up a hand. I didn't want to be moved like a problem. I didn't want to carry this collapsing scene past strangers' salads and bread baskets. We were already a small theater. I met him at a salsa class, I said, surprising myself with how straight my back felt as I stood. He told me he was a widower. I told it to my children, not to Vanessa and not to Richard, whose face had gone slack with the slackness of a person who has run out of improvisation and has not prepared any truth. Vanessa's lips bent into a smile that had no warmth in it. "He's not a good dancer," she remarked, and the server with the knife made a noise he tried to disguise as a cough. I suppose that part wasn't a lie. "I suppose not," I said, because it was the only safe place in a landscape where every step could be used against me. My cheeks were hot against the cool air, and I could feel the thrum in my chest that my cardiologist has called a benign murmur. Annoying but not dangerous. I put my palm over my heart as if to send it a message. "I know you're trying. We've made it through worse." In the summer of the year I turned 64, I started going to the community center in Coral Gables on Wednesday nights because the flyers said beginners welcome, and I wanted to do something my husband Henry and I used to laugh about. He had been a high school history teacher, kind the way Midwestern boys are raised to be kind. For 37 years, we shared a house, grocery lists, mortgage payments, the predictable rhythm of love that isn't made of grand gestures, but of trash taken out before the bag breaks, of coffee brought to the bedside on mornings when the rain is soft. When he got sick, I learned the names of medications more easily than I learned the steps to any dance. I learned the art of waiting in parking garages at Jackson Memorial, with the engine off and my hands on the wheel, thinking if I just kept my palms there, I could steady the elevator of my life that had plunged without asking. He was gone before I turned 62. Grief made the house sound different. Even the ice maker in the freezer made a sound like a person shuffling in slippers at 2 a.m. I stayed in the house because Jessica lived 10 minutes away, and Michael, though he had moved to Kendall with his wife and the girls, came by on Sundays to mow the lawn, even when I told him I could pay a service. The bougainvillea out front bloomed in a defiant purple that winter, like a woman who wore lipstick just to make herself feel something besides empty. When I read the flyer for the salsa class, I put the paper on my refrigerator with a little magnet shaped like a Florida orange. On the night I finally went, I wore the shoes Jessica bought me for Mother's Day, low heels with straps that make you feel graceful. The room smelled like clean wood and the soft tang of other people's nervousness. A man counted aloud into a microphone. Uno, dos, tres, and even though my Spanish has always been clumsy, the numbers made sense. Forward, back, forward, back. Someone had strung lights along the ceiling, and they made everything look kinder. He was standing near the back, a hand in his pocket, watching instead of doing. His shirt was the sort of blue you buy when you want to look a little handsome without trying too hard. He had that nice head of gray hair that you see in advertisements for retirement communities. When he saw me watching him, he smiled. It wasn't a big smile. I have never trusted big smiles, but the kind you get from someone who understands you're both out of your element, and there's comfort in that. "I'm Richard," he said when the instructor told us to pair up. "Please don't let me step on your toes." "I'm Margaret," I said, and I heard my mother in my voice, a steadiness that made even new things sound familiar. "I'll step on yours first, so you can get it over with." We moved carefully, the way people do when they're trying not to hurt one another. He told me he was a widower. He said the word like a wince, like he was embarrassed to be dragging his sadness into a room meant for joy. He touched my hand lightly, never holding too tight. When we sat down for water between songs, he asked me where I was from originally, and I said Ohio. And he nodded and said he grew up in New Jersey near the river, that Miami still felt like a dream he couldn't quite believe. I didn't tell my children about him for weeks because everything felt fragile, like a bird you'd found on the sidewalk and warmed in your hands. We would get coffee on Fridays at the bakery across from the library. He liked the guava pastries and the way the glass cases misted in the afternoons. We took walks at Matheson Hammock Park, and he told me stories about the boats he would never buy and the trips he would never take, because, he said with a smile that managed to be rueful and charming simultaneously, it's not the same without her. I wore my wedding ring still, and he noticed once but didn't say anything. The next time we met, he wore a plain band on his right hand. It feels strange to be without it, he said, and I nodded because I understood. Grief leaves imprints on your body where objects used to be. He never stayed late. He always had a reason to turn toward home when the sun dipped down behind the palms. He said he was tired earlier than he used to be, that the evenings were hard, that he talked to his daughter on the phone after she put her little one to bed. I believed him because that was the version of life I knew too. The parenting that continues even when your children are grown. The loyalty to routines that keep you from sinking. He would duck his head when I asked about weekends, and there was a softness in that ducking that felt like respect, not avoidance. Sundays are tricky, he would say. My church, my sister. He had a lot of words that placed him next to people, made him look like the sort of man other people still counted on. In my own life, counting on someone had always been a matter of quiet math. After Henry got sick, I had taken on extra hours as a unit secretary at the hospital, so Jessica could finish her nursing degree without worrying about helping me with the bills. I had sold the gold bracelet my mother left me to fix the roof after the storm that ripped at the shingles like an animal. When Michael lost his job the year the company downsized, I sent him the exact amount I could spare every week, cash tucked into a card, because I knew the embarrassment he felt and didn't want to add a bank transaction to it. I had worked the Saturday shifts at the library, checking out stacks of children's books to parents with tired eyes and saying, "No need to rush the return," because I remember how long a week can be when you need one quiet story before bed. Those were the sorts of sacrifices you don't score as points. They are the things women of my age in this country do quietly, half out of habit, half out of love. We don't advertise them. So when Richard looked at me like my carefulness was a thing to admire, I let that feeling sit on my shoulder for a while and warm me. And then the day came when Jessica said, "Mom, if this is a person in your life, we'd like to know him." And I said yes, because secrecy is heavy, and I was tired. "We'll keep it simple," she said. And the Cheesecake Factory at the Dadeland Mall felt like the sort of place where nothing terrible happens. You go there for tall slices of something sweet with names like Celebration or Adam's Peanut Butter Fudge Ripple, not for verdicts. I invited Richard to come after we had been seeing each other for months in a way that felt like we were inching toward something without naming it. He said yes easily. He said, "It will be good to say hello." And then we hung up with that clean feeling you get when you've said the right thing. He arrived in a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves folded up, the way men do to look casual. It wasn't until the pendant lights threw it into spotlight that I saw the ring on his left hand, a flash that cut across the table like a car coming fast through an intersection of your day. Vanessa was right behind him, her cream blazer immaculate despite the Florida heat, her hair tucked behind her ears in a way that made me think of precision. She took his hand and threaded their fingers and said those 4 words that snapped the room into place. I'm his wife. I had never met her before, but I recognized the way she looked at me. It wasn't hatred. People think public shaming requires anger, but contempt does the job more efficiently. She used the word wife like a gavel. She set the papers down like she was setting a table for a meal we were required to eat. I didn't know, I said then, and my voice didn't wobble. I didn't finish the sentence because the person who needed to hear its end already knew. Richard closed his eyes for a second longer than a blink and then opened them again, and he looked smaller for it. A man is not a building, but you can still watch him reduce story by story. Vanessa slid the first page toward me. Do you recognize these? She asked. The messages were mine, the words I had typed with my thumb while stirring soup, while waiting for water to boil, while sitting in my car before walking into the grocery store. They said things like, I hope today was gentle with you, and do you need anything from Publix? I'm there now, and the sky is a good blue today. Have you looked at it? There were emojis, the little hearts I used sparingly. There were no indecencies. I don't know if that mattered to her. I recognize my kindness, I said, and I saw Jessica's head lift a fraction, the way it did when she heard a new nurse say something braver than expected. Michael's jaw flexed once and released. Vanessa's lips thinned. My point is simple, she said. I found these on his phone under another name, and now my children know their father has secrets. I thought it proper to let you know I know what you are." She didn't say it. She didn't have to. The word she wanted to hang over my head like a cloud was old, the kind of word people throw at women to make them smaller. Forgive me for being grateful she didn't speak it where my granddaughters could hear. "I am Margaret," I said again, more to myself than to anyone else. "I have learned, over 6 decades and change, to stand in my own name when the ground under me tilts." The hostess cleared her throat. "Maybe we should," she began, but her hands fluttered, unsure of what her sentence could possibly fix. "We will cut the cake," I said, surprising myself with how level the decision sounded once it was voiced. "We will not cancel a child's idea of a birthday." I looked at my girls. "After that, your Nana will talk to her children outside while your mother pays the check. Please don't eat the frosting with your fingers. The rules make order, and I have always been good at rules." Vanessa made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "How tidy," she said. Her tone wasn't loud enough for the next table. It was pitched just for me. I felt its little blade. "Everything breaks cleanest when you're careful," I replied. And I had not known until that moment that my mother's voice could still come into my mouth like that. All Ohio farmhouse wisdom shaded by Miami sun. We sang. It wasn't good singing, and I don't think anyone actually wanted cake, but my granddaughters took polite bites, like they were showing me that love can happen even in a bad room. The servers exhaled as if they were allowed to breathe again. Richard stood as far back as he could while still remaining in the scene. When it was over, I lifted my purse and my pride and walked outside into the bright slice of afternoon. Michael came after me, his sneakers scuffing the tile. In the parking lot, the heat rose in waves off the hoods of cars. Beyond the palms, the sky was the perfect Florida blue I had texted about. He touched my shoulder. "Mom," he said, and the word broke like an egg in a bowl, spilling. "I didn't know," I told him again. "If I had known, I would have ended it before it began." He nodded. He looked at me with his father's face, the way a son can hold his father's jaw and eyes even after the years have washed other things away. "I believe you," he said. Relief was so sharp it surprised me. Jessica joined us, her hand squeezing mine, that nurse's squeeze that says I am here and also I am accounting for pulse and blood and breath. "He told you he was a widower?" she asked, and when I nodded, she closed her eyes for a second and then opened them again. "We can fix family. We can't fix strangers who walk in and take a seat at our table and throw things." Her voice was soft, and I felt the heat at the back of my eyes finally threaten to spill. "I don't want to be anyone's lesson," I said, "but I suppose I am now." That night, after the mess of returning home with balloons we didn't want and uneaten cake we didn't need, I put on water for tea because my hands needed a task. The house was cooler by then, the way Florida evenings know how to forgive the afternoon. I watered the bougainvillea and set a dish of water out back for the stray cat that comes by some nights and pretends not to need me. My phone chimed. Richard's name lit the screen and then stopped and then lit again. I let it. Sometimes it is a kindness to answer, and sometimes it is a kindness to let a person sit in the room he has made for himself. The voicemail was a murmur of apology, words stringing together around the same small center. "I'm sorry. I meant..." I listened once and then deleted it. Then the phone chimed again. Another voice, clipped, careful. "This is Vanessa. I would prefer not to make further scenes. I will not contact you again if you confirm you will not contact him. We have children. Be decent, please. It would be best. Her kind of best." I made my tea and left both messages unanswered because I needed to hear my own thoughts before I let anyone else back in. My thoughts have always been slower than other people's, but they arrive, like a tide coming back. I sat in Henry's chair and let the evening settle around me. There was a picture on the mantel of the 4 of us, me, Henry, Michael, and Jessica, standing in front of the rental car in the parking lot at the Grand Canyon the summer Michael was 10. We had driven in a straight line for hours, stopping for root beer and peanuts, and when we finally stood at the edge, the light made the rocks look like jars of spices tipped over in layers. When the wind got too bold, I held the kids back from the railing by the shoulders, the way mothers do without thinking. That's what it felt like now, standing at an edge, keeping whoever I could from falling. In the days after the restaurant, little details floated up in my memory like things rising in a pot of soup. The way Richard always wanted to meet during the day. The way he kept his phone face down on the table. The way he had balked when I suggested he come to see Jessica's girls in their school showcase, saying he wasn't ready to meet the family, and then later, how he had changed his answer and said he would, and then he did not appear. The way he sometimes used words that didn't sound like him when he talked about weekends, obligations, commitments, and how they floated above the specifics like clouds that didn't want to rain. I thought, too, of the ways he had been kind. The way he had fixed the loose hinge on my pantry door just because he noticed. The way he held my elbow over a curb I could have easily navigated myself. The way he listened, how he could say, "That must have been hard," without trying to change the subject to himself. It is important to name what was good so that the loss can be honest. But an honesty that doesn't change your next step is no good at all. The Wednesday after my birthday, I went back to the community center with the orange magnet flyer still on my refrigerator, and I stood in the room with the wooden floors and the summer lights, even though I knew I might see him there. I wore the same shoes with the straps that make me feel steady. The instructor looked happier to see me than anyone else did that night, and he didn't ask me any questions. He put on a song and reminded me to count. Uno, dos, tres, forward, back, forward, back. The steps know what to do when the person inside them does not. He didn't come. Some part of me missed the way he had always been 5 minutes early. Some part of me breathed easier. After class, I sat on the low wall outside and pulled a small paper bag out of my purse. I had brought 2 pastelitos de guayaba because I had gotten used to buying 2. I ate one and set the other beside me. The ants found it first. An ibis strutted by and scolded me for my waste. I laughed, and my own laughter felt like a bell rung in a quiet place. The next mornings returned to a tightening of routine. At 9, I walked around the block and waved to Mr. Alvarez as he watered his lawn, and he waved back and said, "Buenos dias, Marga," in the Spanish nickname he has given me, because he likes to make everyone his neighbor. At 11, I went to Publix for groceries and smiled at the same cashier whose name tag says Lily with a smiley face sticker. At 3, I made cafecito the way my neighbor taught me, even though I am not Cuban, and even though it makes me too caffeinated at night. There is a comfort in the whisking of sugar with the first drops, the way it becomes a brown foam, like the top of a little sea. When Jessica stopped by later that week, she took my hand before sitting. "Tell me everything," she said, and I heard in her voice not just the request for facts, but the request for family, the way a daughter asks to be let all the way in. So I told her about the salsa class and the park and the pastries. I told her about the ring he wore on his right hand. I told her about the Sundays that were tricky and the phone that sat face down and how I had pretended those things were the preferences of a single man who did not want to be seen hurting and not the habits of a married man who did not want to be seen, period. She listened with her nurse's face, which is to say, she listened with a gentleness that never slips into pity. "Mom," she said when I was done, "you have always told us to look for patterns. You taught me that the first time my heart was broken and I wanted to say it was a one-time mistake. You said people repeat." He repeated this. "That makes it his pattern, not your shame." In the late afternoon, after Jessica left and the house took that deep breath it takes when its people go, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "This is Julie from the Wednesday Night Beginners," it said. "I'm sorry to text you, but I wanted you to know a woman named Elena. She's in the class too. Told me she got the same story as you from the same man. I don't know if you want to talk, but I have her number. Maybe we should be careful together." The words walked right up to me and took my hand. I called her. We spoke in the exact voice women use with one another when we find out a story's twist was not ours alone. We were not surprised, and we were still surprised. "I'm not interested in making a scene," I told Elena. The scene was already made for me. I am interested in making sure it doesn't get made for someone else." She laughed a little in relief. "Then maybe we do something old-fashioned," she said. "We tell the truth, plain." We agreed to speak to the community center director. We agreed to tell him kindly that Richard had been introducing himself as a widower, and that there were at least 2 of us who could confirm he had a different life. We asked for nothing. We asked only that he look out for the newest person who might walk in wearing shoes that felt like bravery. That weekend, Michael brought the girls over and mowed my lawn, even though I told him again I could pay someone. The girls did puzzles on the rug and sang a song they had learned at school about the states. They got as far as Alabama before one of them lost the thread and started humming, and the other whispered, "Don't worry, skip to Florida," which made me smile. After the girls went to play with the cat that wasn't mine, Michael and I sat at the kitchen table where the afternoon light makes a square on the tablecloth. "When your grandfather left Ohio," I told him, surprising myself with the tilt into memory, "he had $40 and a sense that life would be kinder somewhere warmer. He and your grandmother got as far as Jacksonville before the car made a noise they knew meant something expensive. They took turns sleeping in it that first week. I got born because people keep going, even when cars do not." He laughed. I let him. I say that to say this. I have always been the kind of person who believes I can steer into a better road even when there's a bump. "I know," he said gently. "I will speak to a lawyer about what, if anything, needs to be done to make sure none of this can be twisted into some legal trouble. I will speak to the director at the center and to the women who want safety more than they want romance. I will write myself a letter and then put it in the drawer so that if I waver, if I start to wonder whether I imagined the wrong where there was wrong, I can read my own words and steady." I touched the table, felt its familiarity. "And you, my son, will not stand guard over my phone or call me 5 times a day or stop me from putting on a dress and going where there is music." He smiled. "Yes, ma'am," he said, with half a joke, the way Florida boys do when they know when to lighten and when to listen. In the days that followed, little ripples reached me. The director was gracious and apologized without making it sound like an apology that had a budgetary line item attached to it. He said he would speak to Richard about expectations for the class and community guidelines, and though I understood the limits of what could be done, I felt the relief of being believed. Elena and I met for coffee and laughed about how we had both learned to twist our hair the same way on dance nights, the way women share small skills without making a big deal of them. A woman named Denise joined us the following week and said she hadn't believed herself until she heard us, and we made a little triangle of people who watched one another's faces and nodded and made room. And then, on the Tuesday after all of this started, I ran into Vanessa outside the bakery where Richard and I used to meet on Fridays. The timing felt almost scripted, and then very human. Of course, we circulate in the same loops. This is Miami. We all end up under the same palm fronds sooner or later. She was alone, a brown paper bag tucked under her arm, her cream blazer gone, replaced by a simple navy blouse. For a moment, we looked at each other like women who have reached for the same scarf at a department store sale. 2 hands on a fabric neither of us wants to give up. "I'm not here to take anything," I said first, because it took something inside me to say it. She nodded. I watched a micro-expression. Someone had taught me that word once, micro-expression. Flutter across her face. The exhaustion that comes after anger leaves you with the practical matters. "I shouldn't have brought those papers to your party," she said, and it was so unexpected that I had to take a small step back. I thought it would make me feel righteous. It didn't. I'm not proud. She looked down at her own ring. I have never been in this position. I wanted to be the person who makes the point, and then the point fixes everything. She let out a breath. "I can see that you didn't know." She looked up at me. "That doesn't make me feel better." "No," I said. "It doesn't. It doesn't make me feel better either." She nodded again, a small motion that didn't try to build a bridge, but acknowledged a river. "I have talked to him," she said, and in those 4 words I heard 100 fights, with 100 kitchen tables and 100 cups of coffee cooling untouched. He told me about the class. He will not go back. You might be relieved. You might be sad. I don't know. "I am both," I admitted, "because it serves no one to pretend otherwise. I am often both these days. There it is, she said softly, not unkindly. We stood there like that for another moment, two women who had found one another on opposite sides of the same messy human story. There are stories like this all over America, all over Miami, all over small towns and big cities and places where the sun hits differently, but the people inside it feel the same kinds of ache. My country is full of women tending plants in the evening, making lists, returning library books, stirring sauce, forgiving and not forgiving in equal measures. We are not alone in our messy. When I went home, I took Henry's ring from the dish on my dresser and put it back on my finger. I do this sometimes when I need the weight of something honest. I spoke out loud in my empty room, the way I sometimes do, because sad things do better when you say them, where you can hear them. I loved you once, I told the air, thinking of Richard and not saying his name because my house knows what I mean. And I can step away from that love and still honor that it happened. Then I turned off the light and slept. The larger conflict, I have come to understand, is not with Vanessa or even with Richard. It is with the story people tell that says women of my age are foolish to hope, or that we should have outlived risk by now, as if turning 67 grants you a map of all the places not to stand. We are told quietly and loudly to become invisible for safety. I refuse. I will make my safety louder than my invisibility. I went back to the community center again, and I brought with me a stack of blank note cards. On them, I wrote simple things. You deserve someone who tells the truth. Your kindness is not wasted just because it was handed to the wrong hands. Forward, back, forward, back. Each step is a chance to change direction. I left them on the table by the door where people pick up schedules. No one had asked me to do this, but we are allowed to be useful to strangers. A woman with a pink scarf picked one up, read it, and smiled. It was small. It was something. On Sundays, I still go to the farmer's market. I buy tomatoes and basil and a loaf of bread with seeds on top that crackle when you cut into it. I say hello to the woman who sells the honey and tells you which one is good for allergies. At 3, I still make my cafecito. Sometimes I add a drop of steamed milk, making it a cortadito like my neighbor taught me to, saying, "Here, mija," the way mothers say everywhere when they hand you something you didn't know you needed. On Wednesdays, I dance a little better. On Thursdays, I volunteer at the library and help a man who is older than me set up an email account so he can see pictures of his great-grandson in California. He says, "You're a lifesaver," and I say, "You'll be just fine." And we both believe it for that minute. I tell you this not as a neat bow for a messy week, but as a promise. There are women who will try to make the bad scene the whole play. There are men who will let them because they are afraid to stand in their own blame. There are children who will look at your face and try to read it for answers you don't yet have. And there is you. There is your name. There are your hands doing steady things like slicing onions, like planting rosemary, like tying a ribbon on the hair of a granddaughter who asked to be fancy. There is your breath counting uno, dos, trees, and the steps you choose. The next time I saw Richard was at the corner where US 1 tumbles into a mess of traffic near the park. He was in his car. He didn't see me. He looked older than he had in the restaurant, like he had been pulled too hard through a narrow space. I didn't look away. I didn't wave. He turned, and his car merged, and then he was gone. I stood under a palm tree and watched a group of kids in matching soccer jerseys take turns practicing a goal. The coach kept clapping. "Again," he called. "Again, you'll get it." I liked the sound of his voice. There was nothing false in it. Sometimes I want to send Vanessa flowers, not for grace, that would be asking too much of either of us, but for endurance. Sometimes I want to send Elena and Julie and Denise a slice of cake and say, it's okay to eat dessert first, occasionally because we have all swallowed enough difficult things with our dinners. Mostly, I want to keep living in a way that makes the younger women who watch me believe there is no expiration date on dignity. My name is Margaret. I am 67 years old in the United States of America. I have watered bougainvillea and stood under a banner with my name on it and watched a stranger turn my birthday into a courtroom. I have also made soup for a neighbor and fixed a hem on a dress and danced badly and then a little better. The ground under my feet has tilted, but it has not dropped me. The bigger conflict is just beginning, because it is always beginning. Will we let the worst person in the room decide who we are, or will we keep naming ourselves? Tomorrow I will take the girls to Pinecrest Gardens, and we will look at the turtles, and I will tell them the story of the time their great-grandfather saw the ocean for the first time and thought it was too big to be real. They will laugh and ask for ice cream. I will say yes. I will remind myself that sweetness does not have to wait for permission. I will wear the shoes with the straps that make me feel steady. When the music comes on, because in Miami the music always comes from somewhere, I will follow the steps I have learned. Forward, back, forward, back. I will lead when it is my turn to lead. I will not be pulled. And when I find myself standing at a door, hand on the back of a chair for balance, I will still choose to walk in. The day after I told myself I would still choose to walk in, the world came at me in small, ordinary ways that still managed to sting. That's how humiliation prefers to travel, I've learned. Not like a storm with warning sirens, but like a low tide that pulls at your ankles while you're telling yourself it's just a breeze. At 8:15, my neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, waved from his driveway, his hose making that gentle arc over the hibiscus. "Buenos dias, Marga," he called, cheery as ever. His kindness steadied me in the way that a familiar pothole steadies you because you know exactly how to step around it. I waved back, grateful for a greeting with no questions inside it. 2 houses down, Mrs. Park bent over her stoop with a dustpan, collecting the invisible sand that Miami makes out of everything. "You look nice," she said when I passed, and I thanked her like she'd handed me a small towel for a damp face. At Publix, Lily, with the smiley face sticker on her name tag, rang up my tomatoes and asked, "Big plans today?" And I said, "Just the big plan of making dinner." And she smiled and didn't overreach, bless her. But near the rotisserie chickens, I saw a woman I knew from the hospital. She used to work the evening shift at the information desk the year Henry was sick. And when she recognized me, her eyebrows did that climb they do when curiosity is already busy choosing its adjectives. "I saw something," she said quietly, as if the words themselves needed to hide. "On Facebook. I'm sorry." She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. I nodded, the way you nod when the thing is already true and your nod is not permission so much as a marker. Yes, I have this weight in my bag too. Back at home, my phone pinged itself into a kind of nervous tapping. A message from an unknown number blinked up. "You should be ashamed. Leave families alone." There was no name attached. There was a picture of a sunflower beside the number, which felt like a trick the world had no business permitting. I deleted it and then blocked the number because the older I've gotten, the fewer invitations I extend to strangers to rearrange my insides. By noon, Jessica texted, "Mom, we need to talk about a post. Don't panic." Of course, that last instruction is how you deliver panic to a person without the need for a doorbell. She sent me a screenshot from a private neighborhood group I'm not part of. The post didn't use my name. Vanessa kept that small, cold mercy. Just "a woman who should know better," and "my husband's phone," and "messages." The comments were the kind of chorus people think is righteous because they agree with one another. Someone wrote, "These older ladies are sneaky." That word slid under my skin like a splinter. Someone else said, "Men are simple." That made me want to lay my head on the table for a second, because it was too much to expect nuance from a feed that also sells secondhand kitchen chairs. I put my hand on the counter to steady myself and realized I was holding something I couldn't name right away. It was the plastic bag the hostess at the Cheesecake Factory had handed me at the end of that afternoon's theater, a bag I'd shoved into the back of the car and forgotten. I set it down, wiped my hands because old habits keep you steady, wash, dry, make order, and then I opened the bag. Inside was the glittery banner from my birthday, folded awkwardly as if embarrassment had stiffened its corners. "Happy 67th, Margaret," it had shouted over our heads while the ice machine kept time with my heart. Now it was quiet, just cardstock and glitter and string. I held it by the edges. The number looked ridiculous to me suddenly. Not because I'm ashamed of 67. I am proud of each year that learned to breathe around the ache, but because the number had let itself be a stage for someone else's performance. I took the scissors from the jar where I keep pens and string and the rubber bands the asparagus comes bound in. I cut the 67th off. I cut carefully, my mother's voice in my hand. Everything breaks cleanest when you're careful. When I was done, I held up the part that mattered. Happy Margaret. The curl of the Y in happy brushed against the M in my name like they were flirting. I smiled even though no one could see. I carried the altered banner to the refrigerator, took the little magnet shaped like a Florida orange, the one I have moved from 4 fridges now, across years and leases and love, and pinned Happy Margaret where the flyer for the salsa class had been. The orange made it look almost official, like a proclamation that had some legal weight. The paper hung there, and I felt, in that small domestic ceremony, something in me reattached to its own bone. That afternoon, Elena called. "Did you see the post?" she asked, not bothering with hello because we had already been placed within a context, the way a picture is already placed in a frame when you bring it home. "I saw," I said. My voice surprised me by being dry, free of the tremble I had feared. "I don't want to chase it." "Me either," she said with relief softening her vowels. "But I don't want to let it do all the telling." "I've been thinking," I told her, "about tellings." I looked at the banner again, at its insistence. What if we made a different room? One where we tell the truth, not to punish, but so that someone else doesn't learn the hard way. Not the internet. A room you can walk into. "You mean, like a meeting?" Elena sounded skeptical and hopeful at once, the way you sound when you want something. "A conversation," I said, "at the library, or the community center if they'll have us." I paused. My heart did that small, annoying murmur it does and then settled, as if to say, yes, yes, go ahead. "I can call the library. They know me there. I have reshelved enough books to get to ask a favor." "That's very Miami of you," Elena said. And we both laughed because in Miami, favors are a currency and also an art. "Let me know what they say. I'll come. I'll tell 2 friends. One of them is Denise, the lady with the pink scarf and the sharp eyes. You'll like her. She tells the truth like it's lemon juice. Bright, not mean." I called the library and asked for Mr. Chen, who schedules the meeting rooms and always wears bow ties covered in small patterns that make you smile when you notice. When I told him what I wanted, something like a workshop but not, something like a circle but not, he said, "We can call it Coffee and Candor." The alliteration made me laugh. "We do light refreshments," he added. "Nothing elaborate. Someone usually brings a tray from Vicky Bakery. I'll put you down for next Thursday at 6. We close at 8. That gives you time to speak and clean up at the end so my staff doesn't complain about the crumbs." He said it kindly, as a person who knows crumbs are a universal language. After I hung up, I went to Henry's dresser and opened the top drawer where the cufflinks he rarely wore still make their small, silent jokes with one another. There, in a little dish a friend had given me when we were newly married, the one painted with blue cornflowers. I had placed his ring after he died. I wear it on hard days. I had slipped it on the night after the Cheesecake Factory. Now I took it off the dish and slid it onto my right hand again. Metal holds memory. It makes a hum against your skin that only you can hear. The ring was not only Henry, it was the life I had made with steadiness. It was a promise not to accept less than decency, the way you promise yourself you will drink a glass of water after 2 cups of coffee because your body deserves better balance. That evening, after dinner, Michael called to say the girls wanted to come help me set up my speech like a stage. The word speech made me nervous. Speech implies podiums and men in suits offering applause for things they've already decided they agree with. "It's not a speech," I said. "It's a room where we will agree we are allowed to tell the truth." "So, a speech with snacks," Michael said, and I heard Henry in his humor and let that warm me. Before bed, I checked my messages. There was one from a number I knew too well. "I heard you are planning to talk," Richard had written. "Please don't say my name. Please don't put more weight on my family. I know I made a mess. I am trying. I am sorry. I miss—" The word ended there, as if he had decided he had no right to spell it all the way out. It is a particular kind of humiliation to be asked to keep carrying the quiet, even after someone has thrown your name under a lit sign. I looked at Henry's ring on my hand, at the way it sat as if no time had passed since it was new. "I will tell the truth without using words that are not mine to use," I wrote back. "Your name does not belong to me. My story does." Then I blocked his number, not angrily, but the way you finally turn a pot off because the sauce is done, and if you keep the heat on, it will only burn. The days before Thursday filled up the way days do when a new thing is approaching. I printed a simple sheet at the library printer with the words, "Coffee and Candor, Thursday 6 p.m., Meeting Room B." I didn't print my last name. I didn't need to. I went to Vicky Bakery and ordered a tray of pastelitos, half guava, half cheese, because there are two kinds of people in this town, and both deserve to be fed. I bought paper cups and napkins at the store that still sells things for $1, even though the sign says everything is a little more now. It felt good to have tasks. It felt like the days when the kids were little and birthday parties required plates with balloons on them and juice boxes and a plan for when the inevitable spilled. The humiliations kept coming, quiet and insistent. A woman in the pew behind me at church tapped my shoulder after the service and said, "People are talking," as if she were offering me a weather report that I could use to plan a picnic. "People will," I answered, my mother's voice again, practical and not unkind. The director at the community center called to say a few women had expressed discomfort at seeing me at class because it feels complicated, and he asked me if I would consider a break just until it settles. I heard, underneath his careful tone, the budget, the whispers, the desire for smoothness his job requires. "I will take a break," I told him, and after I hung up, I cried in the kitchen while the kettle shrieked for no reason other than that crying has to land somewhere. I dried my face and told the kettle it was not required to join my emotions. I made tea and I drank it, and then I wrote a list of the people who had looked at me full on in the last 10 days and said, "I believe you." It is important to keep such a list. It reminds you of the shape of your own name when it has been called gently. On Wednesday night, Jessica came over with construction paper and markers. "We're making a sign," she said. "Don't argue." She and the girls sat at my table and drew coffee cups with steam and speech bubbles that said things like, "Tell the truth to yourself first, and your kindness still counts," and forward, back, back. It felt like a school project. It felt like charging a battery I hadn't known was low. Michael went into my garage and came back with a folding table that has a dent in the corner from the time we tried to fit a grill and a Christmas tree in the trunk at the same time. He wiped it down. We were a family, making a room out of air and care. Thursday arrived. I wore the shoes with straps that make me steady. I wore a dress that Jessica says is my color, a green that looks like the leaf of a lime. I put on Henry's ring. I unlaced my pride from the little knots it makes and tied it back up in a bow I could adjust if needed. I slipped the altered banner, Happy Margaret, into a tote bag along with paper plates and a roll of tape and a small stack of blank note cards because I have learned I feel braver when there is paper near me. We got to the library early. Meeting Room B smells like all meeting rooms. Carpet that holds the ghost of coffee, whiteboard cleaner, the faint sigh of books nearby, even though their spines are all faced away. Mr. Chen adjusted the chairs for me so they weren't in rows like a classroom, but in a soft circle. "Circles have more listening in them," he said, and I liked him more than I already did for that. The girls hung our sign near the door, and then, in a burst of 10-year-old sincerity, hung the Happy Margaret banner above the table with the pastelitos. It felt silly and perfect at the same time, like getting a song request right at a wedding. People came. They trickled, the way truth does when it has been told to stay small. Elena arrived with Denise, whose scarf really was pink and whose eyes really did look like they could tell the difference between meanness and medicine. Julie from class came with a plate of cookies and that look people get when they are early to a thing that might ask something of them. Mr. Alvarez came too, which surprised me until he shrugged and said, "The neighborhood is smaller than you think," and took a seat near the edge as if to guard the doorway with his presence. In all, There were maybe 20 people, more than I feared, fewer than would have made this a production. At 6:10, when the room had the hum of a group that knows it is about to do something unusual with its evening, I stood. Standing is a small act of will, and I did it the way you lift a suitcase with 2 hands so you won't strain anything by showing off. I held Henry's ring against my palm for a breath, felt its cool reassurance, then let my hand fall to my side. "My name is Margaret," I said. "I am 67 years old. I live in Coral Gables. I like bougainvillea, even though it scratches me when I trim it. I make cafecito too late in the afternoon and regret it at 3 in the morning." The room smiled because the room was human. 2 weeks ago, I continued, on my birthday, a woman walked into a restaurant and turned my cake into a gavel. She told me a truth that I should have been told earlier. The man I was spending time with is married. I paused. The humiliation that followed has been the kind that travels on small feet, in the dairy aisle, in church, on the internet. I have felt peeled like an orange by hands that were not mine. I looked at the banner over the cookies, at the way Happy Margaret had become a joke and not a joke. I brought this with me because I am tired of having my name said without my consent. If there is a subtext to this evening, it is simple. We get to name ourselves. We get to choose what we do with what happens to us. Elena nodded at me from 2 chairs away, her hands folded like a teacher about to lead a classroom out of a fire drill. "I met him in a different room," she said, when I asked if anyone else wanted to share. "He told me a story I wanted to believe. I'm not interested in making a bonfire with his name. I am interested in not letting my own be burned again." Denise spoke next, and her voice carried the kind of clarity you can only be born with or train into existence. "I raised 2 sons," she said. "I held their faces in my hands when they were teenagers and said, 'Tell the truth fast. The slow truth hurts more.' I want to say that to all of us now. There are women in this room who have told the slow truth to themselves. Let's forgive ourselves for not being fast enough, and then we can be quick next time." The kindness in the room rose like a tide. Mr. Alvarez made a sound in his throat that wasn't quite a cough, a man granting a thing his respect without making a show of it. A woman from my book club, whom I had not expected to see because she had avoided my eyes last week when we were choosing next month's pick, raised her hand as if some part of her needed permission. "I'm here because I said something unkind in my kitchen," she said. "To my sister on the phone, I said, 'Some people never get tired of attention.' Then I came here to say out loud that I was unkind and that it did not make me feel better. That's all." She took a napkin and dabbed the corners of her eyes like a woman caught in the rain without an umbrella. We passed the small tray of pastelitos around, and the way people held their pastries felt like a gesture of peace offering, cream cheese and guava like mediation. I spoke about patterns, about the way Sundays that are tricky are sometimes not grief, but guile. I spoke about the relief of being believed by my son and daughter, the power of their simple, "I believe you." I spoke about the small humiliations that add up until a person thinks maybe it is easier to stay home. I do not want to be a person who stays home because other people narrate my living room, I said. I want to be a person who goes to the farmer's market and to the book club and to dance class when I feel like dancing again. I had just finished a sentence about boundaries, how they are not fences so much as the paint on the curb that says fire lane, when the door opened and a breeze came into the room that brought with it all the Florence paper rustle of the library. Richard stepped in and stood near the back, his face angled in that careful way men practice when they want to be present and invisible at the same time. He did not move toward a chair. He did not speak. He simply existed there, and the room felt him the way a person feels a small shift in the room's temperature. In the half-second before my heart had the chance to race, I felt Henry's ring press its cool calm into my skin like a friend's hand on a forearm. Here, breathe. The chatter in the room went quiet in that way that is not silence so much as attention jostling to get in line. I looked at Richard. The wedding band on his left hand gleamed under the fluorescent lights the way it had flashed under the pendant lights at the restaurant. He looked thinner. Shame takes weight off people, I've noticed. It's a diet that leaves you less able to carry the very thing you need to carry. I am speaking, I said, my voice steady and not unkind. You had your stage. You used it. I won't hand you this one. A nervous laugh tried to rise in the room and then settled back down because it recognized that I was not making a joke. I looked at Mr. Chen at the door, and his bow tie made of tiny bicycles made me brave, as if I could ride out of any scene I didn't want to be in. You are welcome to listen, I added to Richard, because listening is how people change. But you may not speak until we are done. He stood very still, then nodded. An almost imperceptible movement. It was the first time I had ever asked him for anything he could not refuse without being seen refusing. I continued. The most dangerous thing I have learned this month is how quickly a lie can rip through a day I had already set on simmer. The most useful thing I have learned is that I can make rooms where the truth fits. I lifted the altered banner and held it up with both hands. The glitter was ridiculous and lovely. This is the banner that hung over me while I stood in a courtroom that pretended to be a restaurant. I cut my age off it because the number was being used as a weapon. I left my name because it is mine. In the third row, a woman I didn't know began to clap, the way a person claps when she has to do something with her hands. Others joined not in a cheer, but in a long exhale that becomes sound. The clapping wasn't for me, it was for the idea of steadiness, for the possibility that we could move through a hard room without letting it dictate what happens next. Richard shifted his weight. A part of me wanted to address him directly, to hand him the pile of texts he had left like breadcrumbs on my evenings and ask him to tell me which sentence had sounded like permission to lie to me. But this was not his room. I let that desire go like a kite that wasn't mine to reel back. Elena lifted her chin and spoke into that small gap. We are not here to set anyone's clothes on fire, she said, and people smiled because the picture is funny and alarming. We are here to make sure our own coats are buttoned. We are here to make the next woman who wants to try joy less afraid. Denise nodded so emphatically that her scarf slid to the side, and she righted it with emotion so familiar I could have loved her for it. When we opened the floor for questions, we did not say the names that would let this become gossip. We said words like when and how often, and what did you do, when you could tell your body wanted to pretend he had told the truth. We said things like, I left flowers on my own porch because I wanted to open the door to something kind. We said I emailed the community center and asked them to print a notice that says, please do not misrepresent your situation. We said I bought myself a slice of key lime pie and ate it on a Tuesday because sweetness does not need a reason. Near the end of the evening, a woman stood who introduced herself as Vanessa without the cream blazer, without the ring that had flashed like a danger light in the restaurant. She wore a navy blouse that made her look less like a verdict and more like a person who shops for school supplies and wipes counters at night. I came because I wanted to see who you were, she said, and her voice was soft in a way I would never have expected to hear from her mouth. I shouldn't have brought those papers to your birthday. I have a temper when I am cornered. It did not give me any peace. I am sorry. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw not forgiveness and not a request for it, but a tiredness I recognized from my own mirror. I am not clapping, she added quietly, but I am not stopping anyone else. The room held its breath and then released it, because that is what rooms do when women decide to tell the truth without asking for anyone else's permission. I nodded to her the way you nod to someone carrying a box, not an offer to take it from her, but an acknowledgement that it is heavy. By the time we wrapped up, the tray had a few crumbs on it, and the coffee had cooled to lukewarm. Mr. Chen looked pleased, not because he got to do anything, but because his room had done the job of holding. People lingered, pressing my hand, touching my arm the way people do when they don't know how to put all their care into words. Richard had slipped out at some point, and the room did not collapse when he did. After we had thrown away cups and folded our dented table and tucked the banner back into my tote, I stepped into the evening air. Miami had done what it does at that hour, softened the day's heat into a kindness. Vanessa stood under a palm, her arms crossed, not in anger, but in that way women cross their arms to hold themselves together. She walked toward me like I might be a person at a bus stop who had information on the route. I'm not here to take anything, I said again, just to be sure our remembered railings were in place. I know, she replied. I can see that. She looked at my hand, at the ring there, at the way Henry's band caught the light like a small memory. Is that? My late husband's, I said. I put it on when I need to remember a vow that belonged to me too. I didn't mean it as a barbed sentence. It wasn't. It was the flat surface I needed to stand on. She nodded, her chin dipping like a woman agreeing to let a doctor take her blood pressure even though she hates the cuff. I wish I hadn't made a spectacle, she said. I wanted to hurt someone who wasn't him because it was easier. I am trying to be better at choosing the harder thing. We are built for practice, I told her. Every day we practice. Pasta sauce or rice. Kindness or contempt. I have lived long enough to know which one I like better to have in my mouth later. We did not hug. We did not exchange numbers. We did something braver. We let one another go without trying to make anything neat. She walked to her car. I walked to mine. Through the windshield, I could see my banner in the tote bag on the passenger seat. Happy Margaret, it whispered to me in glitter, as ridiculous and as necessary as a prayer. In the days after Coffee and Candor, small shifts occurred that felt like someone had finally opened a window in a stuffy room. The community center posted a list of guidelines that included the words, "We come as we are, and we name who we are," a sentence that made me smile, because words can be lit candles in the right hands. The private post on Facebook sank under newer outrage, as posts always do. The woman from the book club texted me a screenshot of a comment she had put on the thread. Let's be careful with our certainty. It did not go viral. It did not need to. At the library, a teenager I have watched grow from the children's section to the section with the heavy test prep books came up to me at the checkout counter and said, "My abuela would like to come next time. She says she has things." He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. He placed a book on the counter titled How to Fix a Sewing Machine and another called The Warmth of Other Suns, because people contain multitudes and they carry them home in canvas bags. I took a week off from dance class and then another because the director's voice had asked it of me in the language of smoothness. On the third week, he called and said, "Come back when you're ready," and I said, "I'm ready." And then I checked my body for its consent the way you check your stove before you leave the house. It said yes, and I believed it. When I went, the room was the same. The clean wood, the string of lights, the counting. Uno, dos, tres. Forward, back, forward, back. The women I knew smiled at me not in commiseration, but in recognition. Elena squeezed my hand before we started, and then we counted like we were drawing a line that our feet could believe in. There is a new woman in class. She has eyes that take in everything and a mouth that does not want to be an open door yet. I watched the way she watched me the first night. The way women watch other women when they are deciding whether this is a room with enough air in it. During the break, I handed her a note card with a sentence on it that I had written at my kitchen table that morning. Your kindness is not wasted just because it was handed to the wrong hands. She looked at the card and then at me and nodded, her chin dipping the way Vanessa's had. I'm Nora, she said. I used to be married to a person who did not want to be married to me. I am trying to make my feet move again. Forward back, I told her, as if those words could fix everything, and, in a certain way, they can. A week later, Michael and Jessica came over with the girls, and we had spaghetti with basil from my little plant and garlic bread that made the house smell like a restaurant, the right kind of one. The girls told me about their school project on the States again, and when they reached Florida, they shouted it the way children shout the home team. After dinner, we sat on the porch. The sky did that Miami trick where it pretends it is a postcard and then doubles down on being real. A little wind moved the bougainvillea so it looked like it was showing off. Mom, Jessica said softly, what you did at the library was brave. I did it so I could keep looking you in the eyes, I told her. And so you would have a story to hand to your girls when they need one that says, you can make a room where the truth fits. Michael took his father's old guitar from where it leans against the hallway wall and strummed a few notes. He's never been good at it. The music comes out lopsided, like a bicycle with one wheel slightly bigger than the other. But the sound suited the evening. It isn't necessary to be perfect to be useful. He sang something under his breath I couldn't make out, and it didn't matter. After they left, the house took that breath it takes when the day sits down and takes its shoes off. I walked to the refrigerator and looked at my banner. The orange magnet held it in place with the reliability of a person who knows what its job is and does it quietly. Happy Margaret, it said. I took a pen and wrote the date in small letters at the bottom right corner, the way you do when you think something might matter later. I am not naive. There will be more small humiliations. There will be a woman at Trader Joe's who thinks of a clever thing to say after I have left and texts it to her friend. There will be a man who clears his throat as if to warn me that he is about to be reasonable. There will be mornings when I forget to be brave until the coffee finishes. But there will also be days when I stand in front of the turtles at Pinecrest Gardens with my granddaughters and tell them the story of their great-grandfather in a parking lot in Jacksonville with a broken car and a baby on the way, and they will laugh and then ask for ice cream, and I will say yes, because sweetness should not wait for permission. There will be afternoons when I walk past the bakery where I used to meet a man who told me a false word, and I will walk in anyway because they have the best pastelitos de guayaba, and the person behind the counter will call me by my name because that is what is written on my library card when I pick up a hold, and I will take my pastry to a table and read a book a teenager recommended to me, and the world will not tilt. There will be Wednesday nights with counting. Uno, dos, tres, forward, back, back. There will be the small reliefs of the ordinary, the stack of folded towels, the recipe my mother wrote in her neat Ohio hand, the way a bougainvillea can be tamed with patience and gloves. Once, on a Tuesday, I saw Richard again at a red light on US 1, a line of cars huffing at the stop as if they were all late for something important. He did not see me. He was looking straight ahead, his jaw set in the way a man sets it when he is trying to hold a world in his teeth. He looked like a person learning the hard way that you cannot keep your house dry with a screen door. I did not wave. I watched the light change to green, and when it did, I moved forward. That movement was quiet and enormous. The next coffee and candor had more people. Mr. Chen wore a bow tie with small books on it, and when I told him it suited the evening, he said, "We rented a second urn for coffee." He has become a person who anticipates needs without making them into events. A woman read a letter she had written to herself that began, "Dear me who forgot," and ended with, "If you must leave, leave like you're going somewhere." We ate cookies and we did not apologize for wanting them. Sometimes I think I will send Vanessa flowers for no other reason than that they would be something beautiful in a room that has held too much watching. Sometimes I think I will drop a slice of cake off at Elena's with a note that says, "It's okay to eat dessert first, because we have all swallowed enough difficult things." Mostly, I do what women my age in my country do. I get up, I choose a dress, I water a plant, I make a grocery list, I call my daughter, I text my son a picture of a sunset he can see a mile away because it looks different when your mother names it for you. I make rooms. Not every room needs a banner. Some only need a plate of cookies and a chair with a good back. I am Margaret. I am 67. If you need something to hold when the room tilts, you can borrow my word. You can hold Happy Margaret in your hand like a small promise. Forward, back, forward, back. We are not out of dances just because the music has been unkind. And when we reach a doorway, hand on the chair back, heart saying wait and go at once, we can walk in. We can set down our banner and our coffee and our calm. We can make space for the truth and invite it to sit. And when someone tries to stand up and make a scene out of us, we can decide to become a stage of our own and name what plays on it. We get to do that. We are allowed. We do not need to be asked. We get to do that. We are allowed. We do not need to be asked. The week after the second coffee and candor, the immediate consequences arrived the way most things in life do now. Slowly, politely, like a neighbor knocking to borrow sugar instead of a thunderclap. The local paper ran a short piece about the library's new conversation series and used a photo of Mr. Chen's bow tie for its sidebar. Someone in my book club, bless her, left a comment about how brave it was of the library to host real conversations, which sounds small until you remember how rare it is for people to call something real and mean it kindly. Richard's life narrowed in ways even I hadn't anticipated. He stopped coming to salsa class. I heard this the way news travels in Coral Gables, in clipped sentences from people who like to keep their afternoons efficient. The community center posted that guideline about identifying yourself honestly, the one that made the director sound as if he'd finally learned a new sentence he wanted to use. A few weeks later, a mutual acquaintance told me he had started seeing someone. No, that's not the right word. He had started attending counseling. I do not find comfort in the suffering of others. I found relief in the thought that perhaps he was beginning to understand the cost of a small story told falsely for too long. To be honest, the part of me that had once wanted his apology did not actually need it to breathe. What I needed was to stop being the place where someone else's truth had landed like a storm. That, finally, unhooked me. Vanessa and I did not become friends overnight. We were people who had once been opponents in a very public tableau. Old habits of suspicion do not dissolve with a single cup of coffee. But our meetings became possible. The third time we ran into one another by the bakery, the situation was different. No paper bags, no sliding stacks of printed texts, just two women who had once been made to form a drama for everyone else's lesson. We bought pastelitos and sat on a bench that faces the street where the world passes, as if indifferent. She told me about how she had called a lawyer, not to make the spectacle permanent, but to ask what she could do that would prevent a repeat. I told her about the girl who had left a note card at the community center door. We neither asked for apologies nor offered them as currency. We traded small, ordinary acts of civility, which felt surprisingly like reconciliation. "Do you ever regret cutting your age off the banner?" she asked once, watching me stitch a corner of it to the inside of an old linen napkin I had decided to turn into a pocket for the tote bag I took to Coffee and Candor. "No," I said. It felt like taking a number off a scoreboard someone else had set. Happy Margaret mattered more than the number to the people who were there. Besides, numbers have a way of being used for headlines. Names are harder to misquote. She nodded, and then, in a gesture that surprised me, and probably surprised her more, she tapped the place on my hand where Henry's ring flashed against my skin and said softly, "You wear the right kind of armor." Those small reconciliations mattered. They were stitches in a fabric that, after the Cheesecake Factory, had felt as if it might unravel. Sometimes peace is simply the act of keeping on. Showing up at the little markets, rinsing basil, smiling when someone says hello in the grocery aisle. The banal, the ordinary, cooking spaghetti for a family dinner, teaching the girls how to press garlic with the flat of a knife, became its own kind of therapy. There is a rhythm to life that, if you let it play, will recover from the most theatrical of ruptures. The banner, the silly glittery piece of cardstock that had once become an instrument of embarrassment, took on a life I had not planned. After Coffee and Candor, a few women asked if they might take a note card or two for a friend who could not come. Nora, the woman at dance class who had been hesitant but brave enough to accept a note card, suggested we make a little quilt where each woman could sew in a scrap, something to carry between appointments and to drape over a lap when a room felt cold. I laughed at first. Quilts felt like something my mother might have made, and my mother had hands that could make a hem look like a declaration. But then I liked the idea. We met on a Tuesday morning in the community center's craft room with folding sewing machines brought by a woman from the church and a basket of mismatched buttons that somehow made everyone more honest about their own little imperfections. We stitched the Happy Margaret corner into a square of chambray. Not the whole banner, only the part that bore my name, because a symbol is more powerful when it is personal and not claimed. The quilt grew as women brought bits of fabric with their own stories tucked inside them. A strip from a hospital gown, a scrap from a prom dress, a square cut from a child's cartoon pajama set. Each piece was a sentence. When we sewed, we told stories in a way that didn't require a microphone. The quilt became a map of the town's private hardships and quiet recoveries. At the next Coffee and Candor, we wrapped it around the table and the women pressed their hands into it like a liturgy. The banner's glitter winked as if it had learned a new trick. to be both ridiculous and sacred. Family mended in the small spaces between events. My grandchildren continued to clap loudly for songs in the living room and to pile onto the couch even when the dog was already there. Michael and Jessica held me steady in ways that didn't always feel like what was required of a child to a parent. Sometimes they simply sat with the television on and a bowl of popcorn between us, letting the ordinary do its work. Michael's guitar playing, I still insist he cannot really play, but he keeps trying, became an evening ritual where his sloppy chords were as healing as any sermon. Jessica returned to her work and to her nights of study and paid more attention to the way I folded towels, as if learning to appreciate domestic rhythms was now part of our mutual care. Richard's presence, when it occurred at all, was a hollowed-out echo. I saw him at a red light once and later heard he had moved his name in the church directory from Richard Halpern, married, to just Richard Halpern. He had taken steps that looked like contrition. Whether they were genuine, I could not and would not claim. What mattered was that he was no longer the principal character in my evenings. My life had room for neighbors and tomatoes and the rhythm of Monday laundry. My life had room for spontaneous salsa, forward, back, without being bound into a story someone else had chosen for me. The public humiliation tapered off as people found other things to scroll past. At first, I watched every comment as if it were a bird that might bring a worm of vindication. This is a confession I make without ceremony. I wanted the world to say I was not foolish. But the world, mercifully, kept its attention only for so long. And gradually I stopped measuring my days by what strangers thought. There were small delights. The librarian handing me a reserved book as if the reservation had been made since before my birthday. The children in story time crowding close to hear about a fox and a crow. A teenage boy asking me for help with a sewing machine manual because his abuela wanted him to fix a button. Those tiny currencies of trust, someone remembering your name, someone asking for your help, began to accumulate into a bank of goodwill that made the earlier losses lighter. I kept going to the dance class because the floor remembered my weight and the counting taught me steadiness. There was a new woman now who watched me watch her, and I watched her decide the room had enough air. The other women in class became, without any deliberate plan, a kind of informal guardrail for one another, someone's elbow to hold while learning a turn. One evening after class, Nora and I sat on the low wall outside and watched the ibis strut through the parking lot. She unfolded the note card and read the line I had given her to carry. Your kindness is not wasted just because it was handed to the wrong hands. She tucked the card into her pocket like a talisman and told me quietly that she had told her sister about the meeting. Her sister, that woman who had been married to someone who did not want to be married to her, would come next Thursday. That was the news I am greedy for. People bringing themselves somewhere where stories can be rewritten. The quilt traveled. We took it to the community center and later to the farmer's market where, under a tent with mismatched chairs, women who had never met one another in the flesh pressed their cheeks to the fabric and wept a little as if the threads had been waiting to be tugged. Someone joked that we should trademark it and sell it as a civic art piece. I laughed and refused. The quilt was not for sale. It was a repository. It held stories like jars of preserves in a grandmother's pantry, sweet, salted, useful in winter. There were moments of embered tenderness that surprised me. Vanessa invited me to a meeting she had organized for women at her church about honesty in marriage. It was not a reconciliation ceremony, and it was not empty civility. It was two women choosing to occupy the same conversational space for the sake of something larger than either of us. We sat at opposite ends of a long table and sometimes agreed and sometimes did not. She told one story about a childhood her mother had made tidy by covering over the rough corners with wallpaper. I told her about Henry and the Grand Canyon and the way light looks at the edge of something vast. We did not present each other our hands as though to exchange a trophy. We offered one another a presence. There you are, each of us seemed to say, which, after all, is a kind of pardon. The greatest consequence was not a change in other people, but the change in the way I let myself be present. I had been steady before. Steadiness had been my trade. But now steadiness carried a new quality: borders. I still opened doors for neighbors and welcomed my grandchildren with a hug and served pasta on Sunday nights. I still lent sugar when asked and received strangers in the library with a smile. But I also kept a list of my boundaries, what I shared and when, who earned a place in my evenings, and how. Saying no became not a refusal of generosity, but an act of protecting the home I had built with my 2 hands and a husband's love. Saying no felt like saying yes to the parts of my life I wanted to keep safe. At Pinecrest Gardens one bright morning, the girls and I sat on a bench and watched turtles pile up like small, patient arguments. My youngest granddaughter, cheeks still dimpled from sleep, asked about one of the turtles that seemed to have a scar on its shell. "Did something hurt it?" she asked. "It did," I said. "It got cracked, and someone put it back together. It swims just fine now." She studied the turtle and then looked up at me. "Are you like that?" she asked. I felt all sorts of answers rise like pelicans over the water. I could have said yes and left it at that, but I wanted to give her the truth that was small and useful. Sometimes things that hurt us become part of the story we carry, and they make room for who we will be. We can be careful and still go in the water. She nodded in the way children do when they decide a thing is so and deserved no more debate. Then she asked for ice cream and I said yes, which, after everything, felt like the right kind of defiance. The quilt sits now folded on my sofa. I drape it over my knees when the evenings feel like they might scrape the edges of my patience. The Happy Margaret corner peeks out like a secret that is also an emblem. Sometimes I take it to coffee and candor meetings. Sometimes it comes to the library where a woman sometimes lifts it like a banner and other times tucks it under her arm like a shawl. The glitter on my name catches the light in a way that makes me grin, ridiculous and brave, both. The banner taught me something I did not know I needed to relearn, that when people try to use your life as their lesson, you can reframe the lesson. I cut the number off so that no one could say my years had made me vulnerable. I left my name so that anyone who looks at the quilt, or at me, knows who is holding the story. There are days when I still feel a sting. A comment on social media I cannot unsee. A look in a supermarket aisle that tries to be a rumor but lands like a pebble in a puddle. Ripples, but not waves. Those small humiliations will come. They are, sadly, part of the human weather. But more and more often, they are outshone by the ordinary sweetness of a life well tended. Basil in a small pot that will not die if I remember to water it on Sundays. A book I finish and pass to someone who actually wants it. A grandchild who falls asleep in my lap like a small hummed song. The balance, I have come to understand, is not between pain and pleasure, but between how much power you give each over the shape of your days. People ask me sometimes if I regret wanting company again at my age, if I would change anything about how I let a man into my life. Regret mixes with gratitude in my answer. I do not regret the slow mornings with toast on a saucer, the hand held in the old way across a table. I regret only the moments I gave trust without listening to the shape of it. But the difference is not a moralist scolding. It is a learning curve. I learned to ask for names and to listen for how people speak about their lives, their verbs, not just their adjectives. It is a small skill and a necessary one. And then there is joy, which enters my life without fanfare. A surprise handshake from one of the girls at the farmer's market, a neighbor offering me tomatoes from his garden. The strange and lovely moment when a teenager in the library tells me his abuela will come and that she has things. The idea that people carry multitudes is not just comforting, it is true. We are more than the worst thing that has ever happened to us. I have told myself, aloud and aloud again, a quiet mantra when evenings get heavy. Forward, back, forward, back. The floor remembers the steps whether the person remembers them or not. The steps are a promise. You can change direction at any time. If there is one symbol I return to, it is the banner. Not the glitter, not the number I cut away, but the fact that it was once hung over my head and then reimagined into something I could carry. I sewed it into a quilt. Yes, but more than that, I turned it into a poem whose lines I can repeat when the room tilts. Your name belongs to you. There is a particular kind of freedom in knowing this. Freedom is not the absence of hurt. Freedom is the ability to arrange the hurt so it does not run the house. The banner is now a metaphor that I place on my refrigerator and sometimes pin to a bag. It flutters in my life like a small flag that says, I made it through, and I will go on. The last time I saw Richard was months later at the community garden where women traded cuttings and gossip and tomatoes. He bent over a plot picking up weeds and did not look up when I walked by. Maybe he did not see me. Maybe he did and chose not to. I did not cross the little path to speak to him. Instead, I stooped to a tray of seedlings and tended them with the kind of deliberate care I used to reserve for my marriage and for my children. Growing things has always kept me honest. When I come home some nights and empty the pockets of my day, the receipts, the small change found in Marie Kondo-like audits of pajamas, I lay my hand against the corner of the quilt and say thank you. For what exactly I cannot always name. For being alive, for the fact that my name is still mine, for the woman who sat in the back row at Coffee and Candor and clapped, for the neighbor who watered his lawn and called me Marga as if I were already his friend. These small things are my repair. We are allowed to make rooms. We are allowed to make banners and quilts and note cards. We are allowed to be both careful and daring. We are allowed to hold our heads up after someone else has tried to make a spectacle of us and to decide, without apology, that we will go to dance class on Wednesdays anyway. If you ever find yourself with your hand on the back of a chair, deciding whether to step through a door, remember that you do not have to be perfect to be brave. Take a name you like and say it aloud. Take a banner that once tried to shame you and turn it into something you keep warm on cold afternoons. There is a particular kind of peace in the ordinary, and if I am honest, it is the peace I have been aiming for all along. To be present without being consumed. To answer neighbors and grandchildren with a yes when it matters, and a no when it protects what I love. My last line, the one I carry in my pocket like a lucky coin, is this: we get to name our lives and then live into the name. If this story touched you in a small place, please leave a comment below telling me what banner you might pin to your own fridge. If it warmed you even a little, press the like button so someone else who needs to hear this might find it. And if you want to keep walking with me, forward, back, please subscribe so we can make more rooms together.